You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Welcome back to Music Tectonics. I'm your host, Dimitri Vitsa. I'm the CEO and founder of Rock, Paper, Scissors. We are a music technology PR firm. And here at Music Tectonics, we go beneath the surface, looking at what's happening in society and innovation and technology to change everything in the music industry. And we've identified several seismic shifts that we feel like are coming out of nowhere and changing everything about the music business. On this podcast, we've already talked about music is more global than ever, which is how digital removes barriers that existed in physical formats by crossing territories in new ways. We covered music is like fire, which is how music is spreading like wildfire into new fields and spaces from healthcare and exercise to food and workplaces. And we had a great conversation with Vicky Nauman on Humpty Dumpty Together Again, which is kind of a goofy way of saying how the industry is being repaired and recombined with new ways that music's being used and enjoyed and so forth. And today we're going to tackle another seismic shift that I've titled Uses Will Remain Faster Than Systems. I mean, different music uses, ways in which music's being used. And I have with me Seth Schachner from Strat Americas to help me pick this apart and maybe promote it or maybe argue about it. I don't know. Seth, how are you doing?
Good to be with you, Dimitri.
Great to have you. You know, before we jump in, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the history of the ways in which music has been delivered or used. But why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do at Strat Americas?
Sure. I'm a digital business development executive. I'm a consultant, and I run a consultancy that does a little bit of strategic work and does a lot of partnership work. So I help put together digital partnerships in the digital entertainment landscape. A lot of it's digital music, but I do work in AI and VR and social networking as well. And I work on a retained basis with different clients. I worked for Sony Music for many years, 11 years at Jive Records before the good days of iTunes and a lot of the digital music business actually started, trying to help start the business up, and later shifted into an international role for the company overseeing their Latin American digital business in Miami, where I spent the bulk of the last 13 years. I'm in LA now. And I mostly focus on partnership activity. I work for clients like Smule and Microsoft and tend to do a lot of work in Latin America, but also the US as well. So in a nutshell, that's who I am.
Cool. It's great to have you, Seth. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So we're going to dig into this concept. And, I feel like the music industry is a bit like a moving target. Maybe we're trying to fix the airplane as it's still flying or change it into a new vehicle altogether. And I think the pace at which new forms of music formats for music is emerging is more rapid than ever. And before our conversation, Seth, I was just kind of like digging through thinking about this to make sure I wasn't crazy, because it seems like every day we hear about a new app, a new platform that changes a little bit about how we think about how people listen to music and engage with music. And I looked at like piano roll starting in the 1880s and going through to wax cylinders, 1890s, 78 RPM records, 1901, radio coming in 1920s, 1930, the first RCA Victor LP vinyl getting sold, similar time when reel-to-reel tapes were coming in. And then it was another 30 years before the compact cassette came on the scene, and another 8 years for 8-track tapes. And we had MTV and compact disc in the 80s. And then 1999. Right. Prince named it, but Napster kind of changed everything. Mm-hmm. And if you look at from 1999 to the next 9-10 years, there's as many format shifts or introductions in music than there were in the previous 100 years. So you've got Napster, ringtones, Last.fm, iTunes, Pandora, and YouTube. I know some of these are kind of overlapping in a way. SoundCloud, Bandcamp, Spotify, you get into the kind of the streaming. So you go from like a physical product to a pirated digital download, this little side story of ringtones, and then legit downloads, and then switching into streaming, both audio and video with audio. Lots of stuff happened. Where did you enter in the music industry? Well, you're kind of in the ringtone era, weren't you?
I think so. You left like the Boston Red Sox World Series out of that time later, whatever it might be. I don't know. There's a lot in there.
Yeah. But I was just thinking in terms of those formats and those shifts. And when I say uses of music, that's sort of what I mean is like, how is music being applied to some? It could be a physical format, it could be a digital format, or nowadays it's like an experience.
Yeah,
And that changes the relationship between the music listener and both the composer, the performer,
yeah,
the publisher, rights holders, and the labels as well. Um, and now we're seeing all these new formats. So video games are a big one we've talked about on the show before.
right.
You've got social music. You mentioned Smule, which you've done
Uh
some
huh.
work with.
Uh huh.
That's an interesting one. And then slightly different, I think, definitely different is kind of, I almost think of these like homemade music videos, TikTok,
Right.
whole new use. And then you can go even further into like the VR world with companies like Beat Saber, which
Right.
is almost like a feels like a VR version of Guitar Hero or something like that.
Sure.
But so what are you seeing in this trend of more and more ways music's getting used, new ways, and where are some cool unexpected uses that you've come across,
No,
Seth?
sure. It's a great question. I mean, and it's actually really it's fascinating to hear the timeline. I mean, because I think if you look back over time, like when there were these format shifts, I guess there were periodically big jumps in revenue, right? When people were replacing their vinyl collection with CDs, for example. Um, you saw a big jump, and then in this phase you're talking about with Napster, that kind of kicked off an era when there was almost like a halving of the size of the recorded music industry. While piracy was out there and there wasn't really like a really great digital response to it. So yeah, no, I mean, I think to answer your question, there's unquestionably loads and loads of consumption, and music consumption is probably at an all-time high. Whether you're looking at it through this prism of major digital services and different types of platforms or uses or configurations, whatever they might be, or just the aggregate volume of music being consumed. I think the adage was it would be like water one day. So that's probably fair to say. I think what's different in the last decade with the streaming era is that there's been a renewed growth in the industry where the size of the industry was halved because piracy was eating away at it. You now have premium subscription services and ad supported services and tons of other different types of things from radio to platforms like SoundCloud to some of these even newer platforms you're describing, which may not be the biggest revenue sources, but are interesting new pieces of the puzzle. And I think that you're starting to see a shift a little bit away from recorded music being the centerpiece of it. So if you look back at, I guess from the 1880s you know, to something in the early 2000s, recorded music was unquestionably, the key piece upon which the revenue and the business model was based. I think it's fair to look at the future and say, is it going to shift a little bit? Is it going to be more about individual artist economies and access to artists and their audiences? Will there be services that result from this that aren't specifically based on recorded music? Or will there be something else? So that's probably the big question that I see. And it makes kind of my gig as a consultant really interesting, actually, because I think streaming has risen. There's been a rising tide from streaming, and it's enabled, I think, more and more innovation in the market. To your question, who's going to win, who's going to lose, I don't know. I think the game is mostly about premium subscriptions right now because those need to grow. And I think as long as that keeps happening, you'll keep seeing more and more innovation in the market. Actually,
I think I want to challenge you a little bit on this because I think there was a sense if you've been in the music industry for a while, you see that there's like a sense of this is how you do it in this era, and then it switches, from vinyl to CDs to tapes to back to CDs to downloads to streams, and I think it feels like when you're running a business, you want to figure out, okay, so what's the model for making all of this work financially and in other ways, using all the resources you have to have to make a benefit to the
yeah,
business and the artists and everything. And it feels like right now people have grabbed onto streaming, but I feel like all these other things start to feel like pain points for people who are kind of solidifying their place in the streaming economy. But these things like TikTok, um, and even YouTube to some extent still, or
Right.
Twitch, where it's not fully defined yet about like what is the value proposition, what is the fair value of the music use of a 7-second video, or how about something like a Giphy where there's no audio
Right.
at this point,
Right.
but there's some video, there's some visual representation of an artist or a band, and so there's no real defined way to say, oh, you're going to use our visual content without the music to refer to music. What's the value
Yeah.
exchange there? And that's what I think that's what I'm getting at with this. Uses will remain faster than
Hmm.
systems, in that the pace at which innovators and creators and whatever you want to call it, those entities out there, people and businesses and startups and things that are like, oh, we could do this with music, we could do that with music, is becoming more and more quick to change and iterate. And it's very hard to keep a business model around monetization to adapt fast
Yeah, I
enough.
think that's very fair. I think it's a great, question and point. I think, historically, I mentioned, in some earlier conversations with you, I worked at Sony for many years, even in the earlier days of, of the mobile landscape when, you mentioned ringtones earlier. Ringtones were actually in some ways extremely important because, they were these early generation products. They didn't start around master recordings. They started with these things called monophonic and polyphonic tones. Actually, I still remember we didn't quite know what to do about it. It crossed our landscape too. So it's a fair point. I had folks in. I still remember my offices at BMG from Brazil, from Mexico, literally coming in asking, our carriers, Claro or America Mobile, Telcel, are bringing these ringtones into the market. What do we do? How it's supposed to be priced? What's the fair value? We didn't really always have a good answer for it, but we at least tried to, in some way, partner with it. So I think that's kind of a normal function of the market. There being some friction that's there. I mean, the thing that I think is different now, and it's part a function of app stores and devices and social networks like an Instagram, where a big artist can go out and just generate enormous audience for him or herself, and that's an economy in and of itself. Whether you're an influencer, you've got a multi-channel network deal, whatever it might be, an ad revenue business on your own. And so the recorded music is in a little bit different of a context in that area. So I do work with one of these social music apps, Spool. I do their Latin artist partnerships for them, and I help bring in artists for them, big ones, a lot of ones from Latin America. I recorded an artist recently from Brazil, Anita, who a lot of Americans wouldn't necessarily know. She's got 40 million fans on Instagram. Um, her own jet, her own fast food place, a line of perfume, just, an economy like you wouldn't believe for an artist. And, I'm hesitant to say this, but I'll say it diplomatically. The recorded music is one part of the mix of her economy. It's an awesome thing to see from a business perspective and a social perspective. And so, um, without going into detail, the music licensing is not necessarily the most important piece of how something like that happens. I think the audience that gets aggregated is a lot more important. Labels may not like to hear that, and that may inform what they're doing with the TikTok. But I think it's a different landscape now. So, but at the same time, I don't see people saying let's not license to TikTok or block them. I think it's a reality, and a lot of parties need to deal with it.
I think even your ringtone example, and as well as Smool, brings up this idea that there's unexpected uses that emerge. And I'm curious if you have a sense of what the industry needs to do to adapt. Labels, publishers, even artists and managers, what do they need to adapt to handle these future unexpected uses? Is it just each time? I mean, I'm curious, when you brought up the ringtone thing and you said, yeah, we didn't exactly know how the pricing should work. I'm curious, like, how did it work? Like, when nobody knew, what was the biggest factor that ultimately led to the price that people ended up? I mean, I remember ringtones at 99 cents up to
Yeah.
like a buck 99, 2.99 for some premium ringtones.
Well, look, I mean, these are great questions, and there isn't one. I can't give you a formulaic answer to this, but you have to kind of go with the flow. I mean, in in the mobile case, so I mean, and I'll speak from the record label perspective, and I don't know how dated the statement is, but your record labels traditionally are wholesalers. They're not retailers. They do have D2C initiatives in some cases, but they're direct to consumer. But typically, someone else will be setting the price, so you're not out in front of a party going, "Here's what the end user price should be." You're trying to understand what they're selling it for. And in that case, the carriers were determining that. And sometimes that's a function of, everything from the country they're in. And in my case, I'm talking to you about Mexico or Brazil. And some of those have very different purchasing, considerations in terms of people's purchasing power and what prices should be. In other cases, it may be someone's on a data plan and it's, the price may not even be felt by the consumer for music or for whatever they're buying. But I think the real thing is, back to your point, you're trying to understand, well, what's going on here? What's the value? How much should recorded music be of it, basically? How does that chart against other things we've done previously? So, strategically, you probably wouldn't want to have one pricing strategy, wholesale pricing for a use that is identical in different territories. You want to have something that's kind of roughly strategically similar, basically. So that's kind of what you're trying to do in that case, and you don't want to miss out on something either, right? So I've seen cases. I'm not going to name names, but where we thought the pricing or the revenue splits were so completely out of whack where you don't want to go into it because you're going to set a really bad precedent, basically. So you have to kind of strike a balance on these things. I mean, I think the stuff I've seen throughout my career that's really unexpected. I had this is a little bit old example, but I did these handsets a couple of years back in America's territories for big artists. We did one for Shakira. I did one for Ricky Martin that we were shocked how well they did. And they were simple implementations of little tracks and packages we preloaded on phones. And we got the carrier to support it, and we got endorsement deals as part of it. And I think we sold 2.5 million of those quickly. And there were things that were not on anyone's radar. Like, it certainly wasn't in the artist contract that someone would go do an artist branded handset in an international territory and pull in a tour sponsorship, all sorts of other elements of it as well. So that would be something that I think is quite unexpected as well.
Yeah. I want to ask you, because this kind of gets into this idea of this value gap in music that's been a conversation quite a bit. And I think, to me, it raises the question of whether the micro uses of music, these little new uses that are unexpected, like they get into YouTube or then they get into TikToks or, who knows what's next, little mini memes that music's a part of. Do those small uses devalue music or do they increase engagement of music? And I'm curious where you stand in that kind of tension.
Well, look, it's really hard for me. I need to know what a micro use is and what you're referring to. I mean, I think the thing now, I don't want to overweight the importance of streaming, but the time we're in now is a heck of a lot better than 10 years back or 15 years back. So, and I see it in so many different ways. I go to a Grammy party and I can't believe how much money is being spent. The last few ones I was at Sony were really humble affairs because our business model was under attack in so many different ways. I think it's a bit of a more steady, state landscape now where premium subscriptions are growing and there's real revenue coming in, which means that I think it's maybe a little bit harder for someone to look at a new product, a new configuration, a new use, and say that's cannibalizing something else. We're not going to sell a Spotify subscription because of that artist duet on TikTok or whatever it is. So I think from what I've seen out in the landscape as a consultant with plenty of different digital music clients is that people aren't trying to kill each other anymore. Even the labels are trying to invest in new initiatives and strategically spreading their wings around a lot. So I guess it depends on the micro use and how directly competitive that would be in, vis-a-vis a streaming service. I mean, I asked, my teenage son recently, why would you need to do any piracy anymore? Or why would you need to get any music that, is, isn't legally available? And he didn't really have a great answer, but I think that, what came out was there may be pieces of repertoire or tracks that aren't available on a Spotify, or on, and you might need to pull it from SoundCloud or wherever it might be. And but I think that's a really small piece of the landscape now. Like I see less of a reason for piracy than I did 10 years ago because of how much music's available now. So I'm probably a proponent of these micro uses, whatever they are, whatever you're referring to.
I'm- I mean, I can make some up that haven't been invented yet. That's part of,
I don't know what a micro use of music is specifically, but tell me and I'll whatever.
well, like when I'm thinking, I mean, not to
Right.
overemphasize TikTok, but it is like blowing up right now and doing extremely well. And I've got a teenager as well, and she has premium Spotify account as well, and prior to that was very into consuming music legally on YouTube, although she likes the premium experience. And marks and downloads lots of tracks that she can carry with her everywhere. But she's also engaged on the TikTok side, and the truth is she's not looking for music on TikTok, and though she will get some earworms from TikTok as a result of memes, um, the emotional engagement with that piece of content, which sometimes is just a few seconds, is not really about the music, but the music is present in it. So in that sense, it's very
Yeah.
short form. You're talking kind of like a Vine, 7 seconds, could be up to a minute, but it's typically not at all. And the music becomes a signifier that connects the videos together, or a signifier of a certain subcultural identity group, although they tend to be pretty mainstream too. So I don't mean subculture in that sense. I just mean like, this is
Sure.
what these 13 and 16-year-olds are listening
Yeah.
to right now, and what they're doing is some dance move on some steps, or some prank on some friends, or some dance that somebody created and they keep tweaking or whatever
Yeah.
and so forth. And so I guess I think of it as a micro use in the sense that it's not the full song. It's not a sample. It's bigger than a sample.
Right.
And the emotional connection is not really about the song necessarily, but they need the song.
Right. Right. No, I got it. Well, look, I think that that connection, I know just from my Spiel experience, what I think is most um, resonant there, what resonates the most is sort of that organic looking connection between an artist and his or her fans. And in Smill's case, we're doing it with something that looks like a live sing along. It's actually not. It's recorded once, and I go off and record lots of artists with our team to do that. And you always want to encourage an artist to look like they're singing live, that not necessarily are. But when you have that connection, it's really cool, and people love to share it. And I think that's part of what's driving it, that kind of fan artist community connection. Now, the other thing I think about these social music platforms, TikTok's Mule, like Star Maker, there's some from China. Um, they can be breaking music platforms as well. I mean, I think this thing that happened with Little Nas X this summer, right? That track's been with Billy Ray Cyrus, has been started, I believe, on TikTok, or TikTok drove a lot of the growth of it. And I mean, the thing is now been at number one, at least on the U.S. Billboard charts, for I think longer than anything. Um, and so, I mean, I totally think that the kids are looking at some of these platforms, and and memes are coming out of it as well, and they are breaking music platforms. They have the potential to do that, and that's awesome. I mean, that only reinforces how good it is, basically. So
Yeah. And you have these other uses that get added to, social platforms. So these Instagram stories with a new music sticker, where you can add music to your stories, and you kind of have to be into using
right,
Instagram to see how to use it and how to do it. The interface is not obvious to an older generation. But but those also similarly, it's like, this is not a music platform, it's a sharing platform, and music is getting into it in a similar way that I would say that sync worked or works as well. It's like, let's use music to add a soundtrack to this experience, but it's now this user generated experience. And I just think we're going to see more and more use of those. And that's not the same to me as premium streaming experience. Yes, we are in that moment in this streaming era where that's what's driving revenue growth. But this diversity of formats, what I refer to as uses or sometimes micro uses, which I don't, I made up
Yeah, yeah,
micro
yeah.
uses. I don't, well, I've heard people use
No,
micro
no, that's
sync.
cool.
So, but a lot of it's like user generated. It's not like the old model where you put a sync on something and it gets broadcast to a million people or 10 million people or whatever. And there's a real budget for it. These are like collecting fractions of pennies along the way.
Well, but I think you're making a really important point. I think that for sure. I mean, I think the personalization aspect of some of the streaming services. I mean, I think about playlists and Echo Nest, whatever it was Spotify bought, and I think all the others have their own different, whether it's Deezer or Apple as well, and I think that's personalization to a certain degree. But I think what you're describing is much more of a at least from the services that involve collaboration in some way, it's much more of an actual kind of near live, connection, if you will. I also see, just from like following artists that get recommended to me on Instagram or on Facebook, um, it cuts through the clutter, at least for me, in a big way. I've been listening to, is it Freya Ridings from the UK, who's just a new artist on, I believe she's on Columbia, and it came purely to me through social media marketing. And as soon as the record was released, I was, all over it, just listening to it from day one on Spotify. I don't know how whatever bot targeted me for it, but I know that in my case it worked. So it was pretty highly effective digital marketing. Um, that really cut through the clutter for me.
Well, I'm still in the mode of like thinking about what are these next these next uses going to be and how people are going to react. I mean, I think another one that we haven't talked about yet are the creation and or engagement around stems and users
Uh-huh.
becoming creators in collaboration with the original composer and writer and performer.
Right.
Um, and I feel like that's something that type of licensing and systems behind that is still unfolding right now.
For sure. I mean, Splice is, I think, a decent example of that in New York. It bought Indaba, is all into that kind of collaborative STEM sharing community with producers. Unquestionably Dubset, entities out there that are trying to, who I believe is helping some of the major labels like Sony kind of sort out the licensing landscape in this world. I mean, I see that whole trend as, continuing. I mean, I'm just reading this week about the Katy Perry Dark Horse case, which is a little bit mind-boggling to me because I think what you're describing only gets deeper and deeper. I think producers, artists, writers will collaborate, whether they're writing to beats or sharing them remotely. And in the Katy Perry case, it feels to me like, at least for what I've seen initially, that will only kind of rise the tide of more infringement claims happening, which I don't necessarily think you want artists or creators to be thinking about when they're writing a song.
Well, I mean, I'm actually saying one step further, which is if you've created an app where you can offer a consumer experience, a listening experience that's actually a playing experience where they are now taking stems from known songs,
Hmm.
recreating them. It's not just a remix where you're like sort of hacking it together necessarily, but where you've literally got this new opportunity to take these stems, interact with them, create something new. And theoretically, you could then eventually have a distribution model built in so that a fan could push their remix that's based on a tablet. They don't even have to have any like special equipment or anything. Create a song and and resell it. And then do they get a percentage of sales? The original songwriters and performers and master rights holders get a percentage of sales. All that stuff, like
Right, right.
we have a system in place for that. I assure you, it's going to happen.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's I know a startup called Recordgram out of Miami that I think is straight in the targets of that. Out of Band Lab is doing similar stuff to that as well. But no, I mean, I think yeah, I think that sort of collaborative creation and sharing, and then building a business around it, is certainly plausible and possible. I mean, I think. I, I still think you probably needs the support of some major entity to market it, to bring it out, in a big way, to market and get engagement for it. But I know there's dozens of examples that would counter to me on that and say you're wrong. And here's the latest breakout hit from Billie Eilish or whomever it was that was created in the living room that didn't need the major label support. Um, so no, I think it's possible, more now than ever.
Going back to the beginning of this conversation when I was talking about timelines, the compact cassette came out in 1962 was when that was launched, and the compact disc came out in 1982. That's a 20-year gap between those two formats. Or you could look at the LP from 1930 to the cassette to 1962. That's a 32-year gap. And now what we're talking about is every couple of months there's some new use, some new way in which people are engaging with music, which may or may not have a precedent for how it's being used exactly. And
Yeah.
that's why we're talking about this. Music uses will remain faster than systems. But you sound very optimistic, very hopeful that labels and publishers and the systems of the music industry are starting to respond much more quickly. So it doesn't sound like you're concerned as much that they're not going to adopt, and monetize quick enough.
Well, I think I know that they're responding more constructively, now than they were 10 years ago. I don't know, if you're still trying to get a contract, I help lots of apps that, it takes forever still to get certain things in place. But I don't see some large scale destruction of the overall recorded music business structure and even the traditional roles going forward. I mean, I know that there will be loads more artist economies that are independent that are created around kind of the platforms that are out there. But I still think there'll be a role for all these things, and I still think that all of these, whether they're the majors or the publishers, are still kind of configured to look at these new platforms, whether it's VR. You mentioned gaming platforms like Twitch. Um, to look at them constructively and try and figure out where the value is, basically, and not try and block or kill them, basically. So.
Yeah, cool. So this has been tons of fun. Is there anything else you want to throw into the mix before we start to wrap up this theme of
Well,
uses will remain faster than systems?
yeah, I mean, as a biz dev person, I'm still out in the market looking at a lot of these new platforms, and we touched on a bunch of them. I think there's tons of interesting stuff that's still out there. What's mostly on my mind these days is AI and artificial intelligence. I just have been working with Microsoft actually the last couple of months, looking at some entities in the market, and still see tons of interesting music opportunities around AI. And I think if you can start to think about like a service economy where almost in the way a programmer, a radio programmer, or a playlist programmer approaches AI and making user experiences better, um, I think that there's going to be a lot of interesting players in the market in that platform going forward. And I have my eye on that more than I do, say, the blockchain or the crypto stuff, which I think has been a little bit overblown. And I'm still a proponent of VR and spatial audio as well, which kind of rides along as part of it through the 3D landscape. I'm seeing some very interesting entities in the market that are trying to be the programmers of tomorrow, whether it's for live events or other forms of community connection. So, someone brought up wearables as well, and some of the AI and music consumption around that. So, I think it keeps evolving, whether you want to call these micro uses or new platforms. But I am still totally optimistic about it. I think it's a new era, and I'm looking forward to keeping working in this area.
I actually agree with you about AI. And until a recent conversation with Warner's chief innovation officer, Scott Cohen, I was pretty tepid on blockchain stuff, but he made a pretty compelling case, and we're working on publishing a piece from him about that. We'll see if I'll be curious, Seth, to get your feedback once you see that piece. But I am also feeling like artificial intelligence music that's created with collaboratively with artificial intelligence is a very important emerging thing to keep an eye on, and it does have some interesting licensing and monetization issues,
For
including
sure.
if you're a fan that's using an app and all of a sudden you're able to create this music, who owns the music? Is it you or the software programmer?
Right.
um, or some combination. There was a great recent episode of the Music and Water podcast that Sherry Who does with Alex Mitchell from Boomy, which is a new AI app that's just come out of beta, where you can really within 5 minutes you can create songs. And as he was talking to Sherry, I sort of started to see that this could look almost like music as emoji.
Uh
It's
huh.
so quick to create it, and you can apply it to a social platform where you're just using that AI created music as a form of expression without having to worry about the whole licensing side of it, which, can threaten real human creators
Yeah.
that aren't using
Yeah, I mean,
it.
I think that's a little. I mean, I agree with that. I think the other stuff with AI, that I've seen recently, because there's different. AI is a big thing that bleeds out into lots of every. If you're really looking just at AI, like on the macro level, putting aside music or even other forms of content, AI can be something that helps manufacturing processes, something you could be in the legal department and have an AI handling lots of basic legal elements as well. I think one of the things that I've just seen in trying to kind of understand AI from the music perspective beyond like songwriting, where you have tracks that are artificially created, is just kind of imagine if there's AI technologies or people as a service that are helping frame the music experience in a better way. And I'm not just talking about like playlists, like an Echo Nest with the way you do in terms of personalizing songs, but maybe it has effects on audio fidelity. It has effects on your listening experience. So I think there's a lot of stuff out there. There's even basic stuff that AI purists will sniff at, that is chatbots that automate some of the dialogue when you're on the Ringo Starr bot or whatever it might be. There's tons of uses of it, and I think that's sort of what is foremost on my mind, kind of looking forward right now in terms of the music business and the digital side of it.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Seth, this has been tons of fun. I appreciate you bringing up the AI side. We've got the AI's Got Talent session that we're doing at the
Yeah.
Music Tectonic Conference, featuring Boomy, who I just mentioned, Amadeus Code, and Song.ai, which is one of these tablet-based STEM remix experiences as well. And we're still looking to lock in one or two more AI companies to kind of be part of that
Okay.
talent show. Seth, you're going to be at the Music Tectonics Conference as well.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be moderating a panel, and sounds like I can give you some ideas on the AI front as well.
Oh,
So
awesome. Yeah, good.
yeah, it's going to be great.
If people want to find you, they can find you at stratamericas.com. Is that the best place?
Yeah, that's a great place. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter as well, which is just Seth A. Schachner. And yeah, it's been great talking to you. I really enjoyed the conversation, Dimitri.
Yeah.
Sorry, but I hope the acoustics were okay.
Yeah, we're
My
good.
dogs weren't barking too loud here
We
in
might
LA.
edit out the dogs. We'll see. But
Well, you never know. Give Oliver a credit. It'll be all right.
oh, shoot. Royalties to Oliver.
There you go.
Thanks for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast app and check out musictectonics.com, where we post additional blog posts about these seismic shifts. And you can sign up for our newsletter at musictectonics.com. If you sign up for the newsletter, you get a $50 discount for the Music Tectonics Conference, which is taking place October 28th and 29th, 2019 in Los Angeles. We have some great announcements coming up soon. So sign up to the newsletter about our opening party at a very special place that Seth helped us find, and some other great presentations, presenters, and topics that'll be emerging soon. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.